Carolina, some planned drone shows for tonight have been scrapped.
Oh no, I don't think they're supposed to be falling.
After several drones collided and fell at a holiday event in Orlando earlier this month, injuring a 7-year-old boy. This morning, police encouraging the public to stay alert to help bring in the new year safely.
We really do mean it when we say the public is our strongest force multiplier. People notice things, and if they notice them and they tell an officer or call 911, we're all the stronger for it.
That was NBC's Emily Akeda with that report, and we will go live to Times Square in our next hour. Meanwhile, we're learning new details about how the nation will honor the late President Jimmy Carter following his death this past Sunday at the age of 100. It will all begin this Saturday, January 4th, with the 39th president's remains making brief stops at his family farm in Plains, Georgia, and at the Georgia State Capitol for a moment of silence. He will then lie in repose at the Carter Presidential Center in Atlanta. On Monday, President Biden has ordered all federal offices to close as a mark of respect for the late president on January 9th. On Tuesday, January 7th, services will move to Washington, D.C., where Carter's remains will first be carried to the U.S. Navy Memorial. He did serve in the Navy, then brought by horse-drawn ceremonial wagon to the U.S. Capitol, where he will lie in state until his funeral. Many presidents, starting with President Lincoln, have done so. On Thursday, January 9th, the state funeral will take place at the National Cathedral. Additionally, President Biden has declared that same day, the 9th, to be a national day of mourning. And that includes the federal government and the Supreme Court will be closed. Following Carter's funeral at the National Cathedral, the late president will then be brought home to Plains, Georgia, for a private funeral service at the Baptist Church, where Carter was a member and taught Sunday school for many, many years. Carter will then be buried on the grounds of his home in Plains, Georgia, beside his wife of 77 years, Rosalind Carter. We'll have more on President Carter's legacy later in our show this morning. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is now backing Mike Johnson's bid for another term as House Speaker. There was some debate about this. The president-elect made the endorsement yesterday at the end of a long and rambling post on social media. Johnson faces a re-election vote for Speaker this Friday. He can only afford to lose just one Republican vote, given the GOP's razor-thin majority in the House. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky said last week that he would not vote for Johnson. And yesterday, even after Trump's post, he doubled down on his stance, writing this on social media. I respect and support President Trump, but his endorsement of Mike Johnson is going to work out about as well as his endorsement of Speaker Paul Ryan. Shots fired. Two other House Republicans, Andy Biggs of Arizona and Victoria Spartz of Indiana, have also not committed to supporting Johnson despite Trump's endorsement. Joining us now, congressional reporter at Politico, Nicholas Wu. Nicholas, good to see you this morning. So let's talk about first Trump's thinking here. He and Johnson have had a up and down relationship. It seemed to strengthen during the campaign, but really took a hit in the last couple of weeks during those negotiations about the continuing resolution. Trump, his aides made no secret, rather angry at how Johnson handled the process. So tell us why. Why did the president-elect go back to giving Johnson his so-called complete and total endorsement?
Well, we got to remember what's coming up in the days after the speaker vote, and chiefly among them is the counting of the electoral votes on January 6th. Now, obviously, a much different set of circumstances than 4 years ago when Trump and his allies tried to thwart the election. And this time around, Trump is looking forward to a smoother transition of power. And in the event there is a delayed speaker's race or prolonged speaker's race, that could disrupt the counting of the electoral votes. Not to mention the fact that Trump has laid out a very ambitious agenda for the first 100 days of his presidency, a large degree of which will have to happen in Congress. And if there's not a speaker, or if there's this internal GOP turmoil, this could make it very hard for them to implement that.
So Johnson, his team, put out a statement celebrating Trump's endorsement minutes after it occurred. They're obviously very relieved that they got the backing of the president-elect. But it's not quite clear, though, he has the votes. We just talked about Thomas Massie. already made clear he's not with Johnson. Others are signaling they're not sure. So how do you suspect Friday will play out?
Well, what we're seeing right now is Mike Johnson and his allies really trying to head off any further defections and to figure out who they need to talk to and how they can quell more dissent within the GOP conference. Look at Victoria Spartz, for example. She laid out a list of demands that she would need from Johnson to earn her vote. It's very likely that they'll talk in the coming days. And on top of that, she's been kind of a chaos agent in the past in the conference, saying that she would retire and then not, and then, next year saying she won't go to party meetings and won't serve on committees. So I think it's right now what we're seeing from Republican leadership is an effort to really lock down the votes and figure out, what they can do to get people to yes, or at least, move them off this ledge on Friday.
And Nicholas, what does this tell us about what's to come? We had the fight over spending a week and a half ago. Now we have these real doubts about Johnson's ability to maintain the gavel, though, as his aides point out, if not him, who could possibly get the number of votes. But let's say Johnson, even if he does squeak by and maintains his control on Friday, what does this foreshadow about how difficult it might be for Republicans to get things done in the months ahead?
It portends a very difficult Congress ahead for Republicans. They'll have an even thinner margin than they did this past Congress, where we often saw them struggle to unite on a lot of issues. And if the past couple weeks with the government funding fight, with Elon Musk and Trump kind of pulling out the rug from Republicans at the last minute is any indication of what's to come, it could be very hard for them to do some of the basic functions of governing, funding the government, dealing with the debt ceiling, let alone moving this ambitious agenda to cut taxes and deal with the border and implement all other sorts of conservative policy.
Right. Congressional reporter at Politico, Nicholas Wu. Nicholas, I know you've got some busy days ahead of you. Thank you for joining us this morning, and Happy New Year to you. Coming up here on MSNBC, it was a big year for the stock market, but 2025 could ring in some uncertainty amid possible Trump tariffs, tax cuts, and that aforementioned very slim GOP majority in the House. We're going to talk about what to expect on Wall Street. Plus, the U.S. Treasury says its computers were hacked by China. We're learning this morning about that major incident. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Jay Jackson. For almost 20 years, Abacus Life has been purchasing life insurance policies from seniors. And in just seconds, you can use the free calculator at abacuspays.com to learn what your policy might be worth.
For many of my clients, selling their life insurance to Abacus was right for them and their estate plan.
Don't sell or lapse your policy without going to abacuspays.com first. There are no fees and no obligations. Get the real value from your life insurance when you need it with Abacus.
Time is running out to give a year-end gift like no other. A gift that can help St. Jude Children's Research Hospital save lives.
These kids, they've done nothing wrong in the world, and they end up having to go through all of this to survive. Your donation, it means everything.
Please don't wait until the last minute. Make a difference by supporting the children of St. Jude. Please donate now.
Oh, my keys.
Well, now that's a pickle. Would you like me to contact your son, Mike, or your daughter, Jenny? Jenny it is. I got you.
With Medical Guardian's 24/7 support, I get to live my life without limits. From medical emergencies to an uneasy feeling, Medical Guardian has me covered.
Just a power outage. I got you.
So I can live my life the way I always have, on my terms. Thanks, Medical Guardian.
5'9" man not included.
Welcome back. The stock market climbed to record highs this year, but looking ahead to 2025, some investors are worried Wall Street could really lose some momentum. With the Trump administration coming in next month, tariffs, taxes, and immigration could all have an impact on the nation's economy. For more, let's bring in NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Christine, Wall Street certainly had a good year.
Oh my gosh.
Some stumbling at the end, but a good year, no doubt. Let's start there. What should we expect from the markets in 2025?
So look, the last couple of years, the best two-year performance of the S&P, I think, in a quarter century, 23, 25% this year, 20% last year. For the boring buy and hold investors, congratulations, America. You've had a great couple of years. But you wouldn't know that if you looked at consumer sentiment for much of the last year. People were obsessed by inflation and the pain of the grocery bill, not necessarily, the boon of stocks and record high home prices. So it's been a really interesting moment for how people feel about where we are. So you head into 2025 with these concerns about a very big agenda: tax reform, immigration, tariffs. There are some really big things this new administration is going to do with a very slim majority in the House.
So let's dive in on that. We know that there's been some business leaders who have already really issued warnings about the tariffs that Trump wants, and potentially the mass deportation, saying that's going to negatively impact the economy and even its ability to get this tax deal done, this tax cut that Trump wants to extend. That might be hard. We just talked, like the Republican majority in the House is so precarious. That might be challenging.
So we could talk about the deportations and the tariffs. That is seen by most people as inflationary. And you have the Fed that has been cutting interest rates and now expected to kind of stop as it tries to make sure that inflation doesn't rear its ugly head. So you have, on the one hand, the potential that Trump policies could be inflationary, and that could set them up with a conflict with the Fed that stops cutting interest rates. And then on the other hand, you have these concerns about tax reform. The middle class tax code essentially expires 1 year from right now, and they've got a year to get that figured out. Business tax cuts were permanent. Middle-class tax cuts were not. So they have to get there with a fractured, I would say, House Republicans, and figure out how to get this tax code done and quickly. Some of the former president and president-elect's advisors have told me he wants to do tax reform very, very quickly and get that out there in the first 100 days or so. But there's that margin is slim in the House.
And there's some debate from Thune in the Senate and Johnson in the House as to what goes first. Should the deportation and tariff go first, or should the taxes go first? There's a lot they're going to have to sort out. Talk to us about what we heard from the Treasury Secretary in the last couple of days, really warning about the debt ceiling and how it needs to be addressed and addressed soon.
And here is that old crisis, that old self-manufactured crisis that keeps coming back when the Treasury Secretary has to sit down and literally move money from the accounts like you would do in your house if you couldn't pay your credit card bill, right? And try to figure out how to keep things going until that debt ceiling is raised. So there's also the possibility that you've got another showdown over the debt ceiling this year. It's interesting. What is the debt ceiling? The debt ceiling is every time Congress passes these laws spending money, we have to borrow money to fulfill those obligations. And there is a congressionally set limit on how much they can do. Big debate about whether you should even have a debt ceiling if you're not going to pay any attention to it at all. When you have fiscally conservative voices renewed in the House with a slim majority, it could be really interesting this year for how this President and Congress are going to spend money and what kind of fights we have ahead.
And lastly, as we close out 2024, we're down to the last 3 weeks now of President Biden's term. Just give us a big picture fact check about the Biden economy, which we know was derided so often by Trump. The White House kept selling like, no, things are good, even if Americans don't feel it. Where actually do things stand?
The recession that people called for 2 years never happened. The economy growing more than 3%. I mean, surprising on all fronts. The strongest economy in the developed world among the big economies. The envy, as the Fed Secretary or the Fed Chair has said many times, when he travels the world talking to other central bankers, they look to the U.S. as a model for how to get out of the inflation crisis and how to get out of the COVID crisis. The U.S. somehow did it right. That did not help Joe Biden at the ballot box.
Yeah, those are the White House. Many at the White House believe it may take the distance of history, but eventually the judgment will be rendered that President Biden did oversee a strong economy.